I've talked quite a bit about Clarence Thomas, whether it be, how he has a lot of power, you know, the whole thing about, how the Supreme Court got super conservative, but I never digged into Clarence Thomas as a person and as, his rise to the Supreme Court. And to me, Clarence Thomas is probably um, one of the most, if not the most, interesting person, in I think in the history of politics, for me at least, in contemporary politics. I tried. There's not much information you can see about Clarence Thomas, nor is there much about any justice relative to, the other politicians of the world. And I think, the reason for that is just because of how, the Supreme Court likes to function about a decorum environment of, just strictly business. But, after reading Clarence Thomas's autobiography, watching his confirmation like over and over and over again, and just kind of just trying to dissect Clarence Thomas as a person, this might be a hot take or a controversial take, but I have a lot of sympathy and I have a lot of relatability to the man. One thing I can relate to especially is, politics aside, when he was drafted for, you know, the Senate hearing and the whole Anita Hill thing, you know, I don't have conclusive evidence whether or not he did the things he was being accused of Anita Hill, but let's just assume that he didn't do it. You're looking at someone being falsely accused, and you're looking at this white panel, this white male panel of just, Joe Biden and Ted Kennedy and all these people asking, Clarence Thomas, these personal questions, these tough questions, these tricky questions. And every time I listen to Clarence Thomas at the very end, I get chills, when he talks about the idea of being an uppity Negro and the idea, you will be lynched if you don't conform to the status quo. You will be, made fun of and shamed. And I think what he's really obviously talking about is the idea that traditionally, if you were a person of color, if you were a minority group, maybe you're transgender or gay or queer or what you have it, you'd almost have to fall on that idea of progressivism because you're fighting against the status quo. You're fighting against, the elites. You're fighting against, what has been already set. So you get touted with this moniker of liberalism. But, you have Clarence Thomas, who was a member of the NAACP, and I think more astonishing, a true civil rights advocate back in the 60s and 70s, and on top of that, a Malcolm X fanatic. In his dorm room, it was said that he had a huge Malcolm X poster. And I think on the subject of Malcolm X, Malcolm X to me was a fascinating individual as well, because now with the, you know, milk toast history of civil rights, we're often told that, you have MLK, he wanted to unite the people, I have a dream speech, this and that, letter from a Birmingham jail, and then you have Malcolm X, who is, a violent, you know, crazy, maybe radical man. So it's like almost you're taught that, Malcolm X was the good one because he didn't cross the line too much, and MLK Jr. was the good one. He didn't cross the line, and Malcolm X was pushing it too far. But that's a very milk toast and unnuanced, take. I think Malcolm X and MLK Jr. shared a lot of things in common. It has been said that MLK Jr. has kind of regretted the "I Have a Dream" speech because of how it's just kind of been softened and played with and made to kind of show that, oh, things are better now when the struggle is still there. So then on the subject of Malcolm X, there's this great bit from Malcolm X about, the difference between a liberal and a conservative. And, Malcolm X goes heavy on the idea of what a white liberal is. Anybody who identifies themselves as a liberal, You know, to quote Malcolm X, I think he says something on the line along the lines of, the white liberal, the white man liberal is gonna, appear as and call themselves the Negroes, friend and benefactor. When and Malcolm X compares the white liberal to, the idea of a fox. When a fox, like a cartoonish fox at least, when they smile, it's not a happy go lucky kumbaya smile. It's a mischievous, sly kind of smile, in the sense where the white liberal is, pretending to be, the benefactor, the friend to minorities, but in reality, they are just using that for political gain. And a prime example of this, I would say, would be Lyndon B. Johnson, one of his White House recordings. This is the same man who signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964. He had MLK Jr., you know, in the Oval Office and talked to him and talked to a lot of civil rights advocates and leaders during the time. He said, I'm going to get these N words voting Democrat for the next 200 years. So I think what's happened really, and I think why Clarence Thomas has shifted so far to the conservative side of things, is merely the idea that he realizes the corruption within the progressive movement, within the liberal ideology movement, about how a lot of people run with these values that, sound good and sound, swell, but in reality kind of just completely ignore them, don't really implement them, only implement certain things before, dives into their business. I think a classic example is, a lot of very well-off liberals in the California area who refuse to sign off and agree to any high density affordable housing near their multi-million dollar properties, and things of that nature, where the hypocrisy is just very concerning for Clarence Thomas. Now, with that being said, do I agree with his politics? Obviously not. We are different people, but I'm saying I'm looking at him, throughout his rise. I feel like I'm always told to think a certain way by whoever the case is, because of the way I look, because of where I'm from, because of, my social status or my economic status of my family. You're told a way to think. And, I relate to Clarence Thomas on the level of saying, hey, I'm not going to fit in. I'm not going to do what you tell me to do just because, other people who look like me do it. And I think, you're seeing that rise with a lot of Hispanic men and black men who have turned over to Trump, where they don't want to be told what to do. Even if you're telling them even if, what you're telling them is correct, and even if what you're telling them is for their benefit, it's like a father and a son, right? Or a mother and a daughter, whatever the case is, where, your parents discipline you, they tell you what to do, and they know it's the best thing for you, but you don't want to listen to them because you hate the idea of being told what to do. And that same logic applies in politics, where people don't like being talked down to. They don't. And I think it's more serious with politics. And, another anecdote from Clarence Thomas's life that really resonates with me is the idea of how, when he was admitted to Yale Law School and he attended Yale, he distanced himself. He was a very extra guy. He was said to be wearing overalls, and you know, he thought that he was different from the other black students. He wasn't, the black students at Yale that he was obviously compared with and grouped with. He thought they were the privileged black folks, and they weren't struggling like him. He was an outlier almost, so to speak. And he thought that his Yale degree would net him a lot of opportunity. But at first he struggled to find opportunity. A lot of law firms rejected him. Keep in mind, I mean, he just graduated from Yale Law School. That is the number one law school historically, and he's having a hard time finding jobs. And what he does is then say, hey, you know what? Maybe this is affirmative action. That idea of like, am I here because I earned it, or am I here because they're just trying to fill a quota, like to appease to the agenda of, equality and diversity or whatever buzzword you want to throw in there. And obviously, I've questioned that a lot. I'm on a DEI scholarship too, affirmative action, whatever you call it. I'm a person of color. So that thought has always been looming over my head from time to time, saying, hey, do I deserve this? Did I really work my butt off for this? Or is it just because, I'm a man of color? Like, would it be different if I was white? Would it be different if, you change any of my, demographic traits, these sort of things. So you get all these things that, Clarence Thomas has been through, being told what to do, you know, working against the system and things of that nature. This guy, keep in mind, is still a Malcolm X, fan. He's a civil rights proponent. And, obviously this is not the whole side. Not everybody is saying this in the black community, but a lot of people on the internet and people I know who are African American say, you know what, Clarence Thomas is a traitor to our race, and he deserves to have his black card removed or something along those lines. And can I say I support that? I'm not sure because I'm not black, obviously, but if I try my very hardest to put myself in the perspective of Clarence Thomas, if your community says that to you, you almost kind of, the labeling theory of it all, you almost kind of just embrace it and say, you know what, yeah, I am a rebel. I'm breaking from the system. I talked in one of my videos early about how the desire nowadays with, globalization is the idea that we all want to be different. The idea of different, being unique, being an outlier is appealing to a lot of people. And I think that's have hit Clarence Thomas hard heavily. And I think that's a very natural human thing. But yeah, I will continue to learn more about Clarence Thomas because he's just such a interesting person. I don't know. Hopefully one day I'll be able to talk to him. I just want to talk to him. I don't really care about the politics right now because, like I said, I can sit here with my little YouTube channel and say, I support his decision. I don't support his decision, but in reality, that's not gonna change anything. So I feel like talking about, his story, who he is, why he thinks the way he thinks, that's gonna net more impact that I want to make than talk about his actual policies. So, whether you agree or disagree with his policies, I think we can all agree that he's a very, very interesting person. And with that being said, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoy your day, and I'll see you tomorrow.